The train hissed as it pulled away from Windridge station, leaving behind a plume of steam and a single woman standing motionless on the platform. Eleanor Briggs gripped the handles of her two travel-worn trunks, her eyes scanning the open land, for the man she was promised, a man who, according to the letter in her coat pocket, would be waiting with a wagon, a home, and a future carved from hard soil and quiet devotion. But there was no sign, no man, no name painted on a board. Just dry wind, creaking boards, and a barefoot boy standing in the dust, staring at her like someone uncertain whether she was real or imagined. "Are you Eleanor Briggs?" he asked, voice scratchy and sun-beaten. She blinked. "Yes." The boy gave a slight nod. "Pa's dead." Eleanor didn't react at first. Her mind stuttered, as if it couldn't accept the words. "What did you say?" "Snakebite," he said simply. "2 days ago. Buried him ourselves. I'm Caleb. I'm the oldest." Her grip on the trunk handle tightened. The paper in her pocket suddenly felt heavier. The letter that had brought her across states and through sleepless nights, with promises of chickens, warmth, and the steady hands of a man named James Walker. Now he was gone, and she was speaking to a boy who looked no older than 10. "There must be a mistake," she said softly. "He sent for me." "He knew he was dying," Caleb replied. "Wrote the letter anyway. Said maybe you'd still come." Eleanor's throat burned. Whether from the wind or the weight of disappointment, she couldn't tell. "How many of you are there?" "5, the boy answered. "Used to be 6. 1 died last winter. The baby's still nursing. We don't got anyone else." Behind her, the train wailed one final time as it disappeared into the horizon. It sounded like a door slamming shut on everything she'd left behind. She turned back toward Caleb. His feet were caked with dust, and he carried the kind of stillness that belonged more to grown men than children. "Where's the house?" she asked. He nodded toward the far ridge. "It's small." Eleanor looked down at her boots. "So am I." Without another word, Caleb bent to lift one of her trunks, struggling only slightly before hoisting it onto his shoulder. He didn't wait for her to follow. Eleanor took a breath, not deep, just enough to keep her upright, and walked after him. She had come to marry a man. Instead, she found a memory and 5 children with hollow eyes and empty bowls. She had no plan. No vows to keep, no real reason to stay. But as her boots crunched over the dry path toward the hills, she felt something begin to shift. Not hope exactly, but the faintest echo of purpose. She hadn't come for love, but maybe love was what would find her anyway. The cabin stood crooked. On the hillside, a sagging porch and smoke-blackened chimney leaning like they too had grown weary of standing. As Eleanor stepped over the threshold, the air changed. Inside it smelled of ash, boiled beans, and something heavier, loss that had soaked into the walls like moisture. 5 children sat at the rough wooden table, bowls in front of them, though no supper had been served. A toddler dozed inside, a wooden crate by the hearth, wrapped in a frayed quilt. The others stared at her, eyes wide but unreadable, more curious than afraid, more tired than anything else. Caleb dropped her trunk with a dull thud beside the doorway. "That was Pa's chair," he said, nodding to the head of the table. It stood slightly apart, its back taller, legs more worn than the rest. "We keep it empty." Eleanor didn't reply. She stepped carefully over the creaking floorboards, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, to the quiet, to the waiting. A girl with tight braids and dirt on her cheeks rose from the table. She looked no older than 10, her hands balled into fists around a wooden spoon. "I'm Ruth," she said. "I stir things. Ma used to. Before she died after Jonah." Her voice was too steady for a child. There was no sorrow in it, just fact. Eleanor nodded once. "How old is Jonah?" "Almost 2, Ruth said. "Still cries at night. I feed him when I can." Eleanor glanced at the pot hanging over the hearth. The broth inside was pale and thin, 2 beans floating in a murky swirl, a single potato sliced into too many pieces. "You cook this?" "When there's food," Ruth said, eyes narrowing slightly. You ain't gonna take him, are you? Take who? The baby. Some women say they'll help and then just take the baby. Eleanor stepped forward, slow and deliberate. I'm not taking anyone, she said. I didn't come here for that. Ruth stared at her a moment longer, then slowly sat back down. Eleanor set her satchel on the table, opened it, and pulled out a small cloth pouch. From it, she produced a piece of salted pork she'd hidden from the conductor on the train, and a tin of crushed herbs. Without asking, she rolled up her sleeves and moved to the hearth. The spoon Ruth had held was rough, splintered, but it stirred the pot well enough. She worked quietly, efficiently. The children didn't speak as she added water, meat, and seasoning. The smell changed almost instantly, from despair to something close to comfort. Even the baby stirred in his crate. Eleanor ladled the stew into mismatched bowls. She served the youngest first, then Ruth, Caleb, and the others. No one reached out until she gave a nod. Then they began to eat, slow and careful, as if afraid. The food might vanish if they blinked. Eat slow, she said. Let your stomachs remember what full feels like. She didn't eat. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe and watched. Hunger still lived in their eyes, but it wasn't only for food. It was the hunger of children who had waited too long for someone to stay. That night, after the dishes had been washed in a tin bucket out back, and the younger children were tucked into bed with patched quilts and makeshift pillows, Eleanor sat near the hearth. Caleb lingered in the corner, silent and still, eyes on the fire. When he finally slipped off to sleep, she stood and ran her hand along the mantel. Something felt off beneath her feet. A plank, loose at the edge. She crouched, lifted it, and found a cloth bundle wedged beside an empty oat sack. It was a ledger, no more than 20 pages bound in torn linen. Inside were handwritten entries, birth dates, planting notes, a sketch of a chicken coop, and on the last page, scrawled in thick, unsteady ink, Eleanor Briggs arrives June 9th. She is to be treated kindly. She has nothing, but we will give her everything we've got. Eleanor sat back on her heels. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that deepened the lines at her brow. He knew. James Walker had written her into this home before. His last breath. Not out of romance, not out of loneliness, but out of hope. Hope that someone might still come. Hope that kindness could take root in the ruins of loss. She looked toward the small pile of shoes by the door, toward the dark room where 5 children slept because she had fed them, not promised them anything. He hadn't left her a marriage. He hadn't left her a future wrapped in vows or ribbons. He had left her a purpose. And as Eleanor slipped the ledger back into its hiding place, she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. Not yet. But the first stitch in something like belonging. The days that followed settled into something like rhythm. Eleanor rose with the light, stirred oats while the younger children yawned awake, and learned quickly which of them needed a quiet hand, on the shoulder, and which needed none at all. She patched pants with string too thin, mended shoes with glue too old, and boiled stew so often that the scent of bay leaf became part of the cabin itself. Caleb became her shadow. He didn't speak unless needed, but he watched everything. How she washed Ruth's scraped knees, how she tucked Jonah's blanket tighter when he coughed in the night, how she never took the chair at the head of the table. She hasn't earned it yet, Caleb had said once, not unkindly. Just honest. Eleanor didn't disagree. But she'd started to earn something. Ruth now sat closer when they shelled peas. Jonah tugged on her apron instead of Caleb's when he was hungry. Even the baby, nestled in a crate by the fire, seemed to follow her voice now. And then on the 6th morning, Eleanor opened the door to fetch water and saw smoke curling beyond the eastern ridge, not the soft puff of chimney smoke. This was different, darker, too high, too deliberate. It did not belong to a cooking fire or a neighbor. She didn't mention it during breakfast. The children were laughing, their cheeks pink from cold, and chasing one another barefoot across the frost-tipped yard. For a moment, she let them have that morning, that laughter. But Caleb noticed. He came in just before noon, arms full of kindling, his face shadowed by something other than the light. "That's smoke," he said quietly. "You saw it too?" Eleanor nodded. "Who lives out that way?" "No one," he said. "Not unless they're hiding." She didn't ask more. She simply added another log to the fire, tied her shawl tighter, and looked out across the land she hadn't asked for, but had somehow begun to guard. That night, something stirred the quiet. She heard it just past midnight, the scrape of wood, the low cluck of panic from the coop. When she stepped outside, the air bit at her skin, and the smoke from earlier was gone. But so were two hens, and the barn latch lay on the ground, snapped in half like a warning. She didn't wake Caleb, didn't tell Ruth. Instead, she sat at the table, lit a stub of candle, and wrote on the back of an unused grocery receipt, "If I fall, let them say I came with nothing and still built something worth stealing." She folded the paper and tucked it under the hearthstone beside James's ledger. Then she waited for morning. It came slowly, gray and pale, as if reluctant to light a world suddenly heavier. She was sweeping the porch when the rider appeared. No dust cloud announced him, no thundering hooves. Just a single man on a tired chestnut horse moving with the silence of someone who had learned not to draw attention. His coat was long, worn thin at the sleeves. His face was half-shadowed, beneath a weather-beaten hat. Caleb stepped beside her, holding the rusted rifle he'd pulled from above the mantel. It wasn't loaded, but his stance didn't reveal that. The man dismounted, hands visible, slow and careful. "I'm looking for James Walker," he said. Eleanor didn't blink. "He's gone. Snake bite. 2 weeks back." The man removed his hat. "That's what I feared." "You knew him?" she asked. "His brother," the man said. "Warren Walker." Caleb's face didn't change. "Pa never said he had a brother." "That sounds like him," Warren replied. "We parted bad. But he wrote me. Every month, like a fool." I never answered. Then the last one came. Said he was sending for a woman. Said he wouldn't live long enough to meet her. Said if she came anyway, I ought to bring this. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped bundle, a ledger, the same linen strip, the same hand. "He told you about me?" Eleanor asked. "Said you were the kind that might stay, even when the story changed." She didn't reach for the ledger. Instead, Warren held out something smaller, a key, dull with rust. "To the safe under the floorboards," he said. "There's not much, but it's yours, if you stay." Eleanor took the key. She didn't ask permission. She didn't explain herself. She turned and opened the door to the cabin, where 5 children stirred bowls and waited for the day to begin. And without saying the words, she made her choice. She stayed. The floorboard creaked softly under Eleanor's knee as she lifted the loose plank, revealing the hollow beneath the hearth. Her fingers trembled as she reached into the dark, brushing against cool metal, the safe Warren had spoken of. The key clicked once, then again, the tumbler stiff, with years of dust and silence. Inside, she found no gold, no money, just a thin stack of paper and a pouch tied shut with worn ribbon. The top document was a deed, James Walker's name carefully penned at the top. It had never been signed. Beneath it, folded in thirds, was a letter, addressed in James's hand. "To the woman who says yes after she knows." Eleanor sat on the floor, her hands shaking as she unfolded the brittle paper. The candlelight flickered over the ink, blurring the edges of each word. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you came anyway. You have more courage than I did. I didn't send for you because I was lonely. I sent for you because I was dying. I wanted them to remember what it meant to be held. If you turn around now, I won't blame you. But if you stay, then everything I have, however little, is yours. The land, the name, and if they let you, the children, not because I chose you, but because I trusted you'd choose them." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, eyes closed. She reached for the pouch next. Inside, 7 buttons, each different: wood, bone, glass, metal, one carved with a flower, another chipped on one side. She understood their meaning instantly. Baby clothes. Memories kept by a mother gone too soon. A history no child remembered, but no parent forgot. And now they were hers. That night, Eleanor tucked the letter and buttons back into the safe, closed the lid, and replaced the plank. She didn't sleep. Something inside her wouldn't let her. By dawn, the fever had arrived. It started with Jonah. His cheeks flushed crimson, his breath labored. By noon, Ruth was pale and still. Caleb said it was winter catching up to them. But Eleanor had seen this before, back in Kansas, where a cough became a burial in just 2 days. She didn't panic, not outwardly. She boiled water, steeped pine needles, and stirred broth thick with salt and herbs. She kept the children warm, wrapping them in every blanket the house had. By the second night, 4 of the 5 were sick. Even the baby had gone quiet, not from sleep, but from a silence that terrified her. Eleanor held him to her chest, counting every shallow breath like a precious coin. She didn't cry. She didn't dare. Warren arrived unannounced the next morning. One look at the sag in her shoulders and the shadows under her eyes told him everything. He dismounted without a word and carried in bundles of wood, jars of honey, herbs from his own stores. Together, they built a tent of blankets and steam in the kitchen, trapping warmth and prayers beneath its canvas. Eleanor worked until her hands blistered from heat and scrubbing. She forced spoonfuls of broth between cracked lips, humming lullabies she didn't remember knowing. When Ruth collapsed, in the wash basin, unconscious, Eleanor dropped to her knees. "Not today," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the girl's burning one. "You stay. You hear me?" Caleb stood nearby, the last to fall ill, his strength thinning. "She gone?" he asked, voice hoarse. Eleanor looked up, eyes wild. "No, not yet, and not while I have breath." That night, when even the fire seemed too tired to burn, Eleanor slipped outside and fell to her knees in the snow. She didn't pray like someone who believed God was always listening. She prayed like someone who had nothing left to give but her plea. "Take anything else. Take me. But don't take them. Please. Just let them live." When she returned inside, the flames flickered higher, as if answering. By morning, Ruth opened her eyes. Jonah asked for bread. The baby whimpered. Caleb, too weak to do much more, managed one small smile. "You stayed," he murmured. Eleanor didn't answer. She only sat beside him and held his hand, her thumb brushing the knuckles worn too thin for a child his age. Later, when the house grew quiet and sleep came in small mercies, Eleanor finally allowed herself to exhale. She wasn't a wife, not by paper, not by ring. But in that moment, she was something rarer. She was theirs. The knock came just after noon. It was sharp, too sharp for a neighbor, too deliberate for a stranger passing through. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the door, heart already tightening. Caleb was on the porch chopping wood. Ruth had just put the baby down for his nap. 2 men stood outside the gate, one tall, with a mustache too neat to belong. In the hills, the other shorter, heavier, with a rolled-up document in one hand and arrogance in the other. "Afternoon," the tall one drawled. "We're here on county business." Eleanor didn't open the door. "What business?" The shorter man stepped forward, holding out the paper. "Judge's writ. Legal custody transfer of the 5 minor children residing at this address." "I wasn't aware they were unclaimed," Eleanor said. The taller man smirked. "Well, ma'am, you're not married to the late Mr. Walker. No license filed, no ceremony witnessed, no record of union. Which means by law you're just a guest, and these children? Wards of the county. We're here to escort them to the orphanage in Bramble Hill." Behind her, the floor creaked. Ruth stepped into the room, barefoot and stone-faced. Caleb entered, behind her, face flushed from the cold, axe still in hand. "Is this true?" Caleb asked quietly, not looking at Eleanor. She didn't lie. "I never married your father. There wasn't time." Ruth stepped forward, arms crossed. "But she stayed. That counts more." The short man clicked his tongue. "Emotions don't make custody, girl. Paper does." Eleanor stepped fully onto the porch, shoulders squared. I have a letter from James, a ledger with his hand, a key he left me. I have witnesses, food on the stove, and children who wake up calling me Mama. That may not be paper, but it's truth. The tall man chuckled. Truth don't hold up in court. Debt, however, does. This land's in arrears. The county has claim, and these children, without a proper guardian, need placement. Ruth's voice rang out, sharper than a bell. We're not going. Caleb stood beside her, dropping the axe handle first to the floorboards. You'll have to drag us. The taller man took a step forward, boots crunching on frostbitten grass, and then came the click. Not from the door, from the barn. Warren stepped out of the shadows like he'd always been there, shotgun draped over one arm like a coat. He didn't aim it. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence did enough. You heard the children, Warren said, voice low. They've made their choice. The short man swallowed hard. You threatening county officers, sir? I'm stating a fact. If you try to cross that gate, you won't like what meets you on the other side. The wind picked up, tugging at coats and nerves. Inside, the baby began to cry. Eleanor didn't flinch. There's no law strong enough to pull a child from the arms of someone who never let go. The taller man looked from Warren's gun to Caleb's, stared to Eleanor's unflinching posture, then he took a step back. This isn't over, he muttered. We'll come back with more than paper. You'll need more than that, Eleanor replied. Without another word, the men mounted their horses and rode off, their retreat louder than their threats. When the dust settled, Ruth let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. Caleb turned to Eleanor. You didn't blink, she smiled, tired and fierce. Neither did you. Warren moved to the porch and set the shotgun down by the door. You've built something here, he said quietly. That's what scares them. Eleanor looked at her small, broken, mended family. They should be scared. The snow came early that winter, heavy and sharp, burying the fence posts and softening the edges of the hills. Inside the cabin, the fire never went out. Eleanor mended curtains by lantern light while Ruth hummed lullabies beside the hearth. Caleb hauled wood in double shifts, his shoulders broader now, his hands steady as his father's once were. Then one morning, just as the soup began to boil and the younger children were chasing one another across the floorboards, Ruth spotted her. A girl, no more than 16, stood at the edge of the gate, barefoot, holding a bundled baby. Silent. Her dress was torn, her lips chapped, her eyes hollow with the same hunger Eleanor had worn once, stepping off a train with nothing but hope and a name. Eleanor didn't ask questions. She opened the door and walked out into the snow. She wrapped the girl in a patched quilt without a word and guided her inside. Ruth took the baby with practiced hands. Caleb stoked the fire higher. They didn't need to know her story to understand it. Her name was Liza. She stayed. Spring came slow, as if unsure whether it was welcome. But the land thawed, the trees greened, and the porch grew crowded with muddy boots and children's laughter. Neighbors came by with flour, bolts of fabric, hand-forged tools. A widow brought dried apples in exchange for firewood. Even the preacher stopped by, arms full of books wrapped in brown paper and twine, a note tucked on top. You've done what most of us only dream of. Then, one day in late March, the county, men returned, same worn coats, same stiff tone, fresh papers in hand. But this time, it was Ruth who opened the door. She didn't flinch. She didn't invite them in. We have a judge's order, the taller man said. Ruth didn't blink. We have a mother. The men hesitated. Then they left, without opening their satchel. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the soup pot had been scraped clean, Eleanor opened the old ledger and turned to the last page. Her handwriting was neat, careful, firm. If you find this house, know that no one here was born lucky. But each of us chose to stay, to love, to build, even with nothing. So if you're lost, hungry, or unsure whether the world still holds people who won't let go, come in. There's soup on the fire. "We've been waiting for you." And she left the door unlatched, just in case. The snow melted slowly that year, leaving behind a yard full of muddy footprints, crooked fence posts, and the faint outline of new beginnings. By spring, the cabin had grown, not in walls but in life. The porch creaked under the weight of more chairs. A new clothesline stretched from the barn to the fence. Chickens, real ones this time, scratched beneath the budding apple tree James had planted years ago but never lived to see bear fruit. Caleb dug a garden in the southeast corner, near where his father once planned a chicken coop. Ruth painted the shutters blue, just because she could. Liza helped with the baby, hers, now theirs, tied close to her chest as she chopped vegetables and sang soft songs Eleanor didn't know, but loved to hear anyway. Inside, the old ledger sat on the mantel, open to a new page. Clara Mayfield Walker, head of household by heart, if not by law. No one questioned it. Not the preacher, who returned to bless the land with hands folded and head bowed. Not the neighbor who stopped by to help repair the roof after a spring storm. Not even the county men when they returned, papers in hand, boots muddy with second thoughts. This time, Ruth answered the door with a rifle leaning by her side. "We've got a judge's order," one of them said, holding out the envelope. She didn't reach for it. "We've got a home," she replied. They didn't argue, because it was true. This wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was something stronger, something chosen, a place where no one asked where someone came from, only whether they needed a place to stay. Eleanor never remarried. She never left the Ridge. She kept the old key from Warren in her apron pocket and the letter from James tucked inside the ledger. She still wore her wedding dress boots, scuffed and worn from winters of pacing floors through long nights of sickness and spring mornings of laughter. She added one more letter to the ledger. Folded neatly, unsigned. A message for whoever might one day stand where she once did, unsure of their place in the world. We weren't born lucky, but we stayed. We built. We chose one another, over and over again. If you're tired, if you're wandering, this is your place now too. There's soup on the fire. Come in. And in the stillness that followed, the house seemed to breathe. Years passed. The garden grew tall with tomatoes and squash. The doorframe bore pencil marks for every inch the children gained. The fire never went out. And when newcomers arrived, they were never turned away. Because what had started as a mistake of timing, a bride sent for by a dying man, had become something deeper, something stronger than law or blood, a house built on the courage to stay. Family rooted in choice, and a woman who came for a husband and found instead the legacy of love she never knew she was born to give.